My name is Dr. Elizabeth Englander. I am a professor of psychology and the executive director of the Massachusetts Aggression Reduction Center at Bridgewater State University, and I am the moderator. That might surprise you if you read the program for this event. What happened to this panel is that it was half of it was laid low by COVID, I'm sorry to say. So we have is a lot of people who have generously stepped in. Exactly. Woohoo is in order. So who we have today is Linda Charmaraman. Over there, wave hi. There she is. Elizabeth Englander, that's me. Henry Willis. Paul Weigle. And Rob Weil. Did I say your last name correctly, Rob?
You did.
Weil. Okay, terrific. Glad to hear it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin by giving everybody just about 5 minutes to talk about who they are, what their work is, briefly, and what this topic sort of means to us, what the title evoked in terms of our interests and our work. We have a really good mix here. We have researchers, we have clinicians, practitioners, and I think that mix is going to be very rich because I really hope. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just open this up. And this is something I've done a couple of times recently, and it's always turned out to be really interesting, where instead of sitting and watching slides, people get to actually ask questions and talk with the panelists. So I'm sort of hoping that that goes well, especially since we imposed upon these nice people to step in. Okay, so my name is Elizabeth Englander. I have been a professor and a researcher since 1993. And I've always looked at children's aggression and how they develop and the problems during development that lead to aggression in children. Back in the early 90s, of course, we were looking at very different issues. Back in the early 90s, there was a lot of concern about street and gang violence. There was a lot of concern about violence in inner cities. Nobody was talking about the middle class, and nobody was talking about girls, I might add. I used to work on large data sets in Denmark, and we didn't even bother looking at the girls. You know, they just weren't part of the problem. And obviously today, everything is different. And really starting in about 2006, 2007, when PlayStation 3 came out, when the iPhone was introduced, when social media launched, really things began to change quite a lot. And I was always sort of a techie in addition to being a child developmentalist. That was just I was always very interested in technology, and that was just fortuitous. I did not anticipate that interest was going to be very useful in my career, but it turned out to be incredibly useful. And so now a lot of the work we do is studying how children interact with each other online and how this impacts their peer relationships and their aggression, particularly in terms of bullying and cyberbullying. So we were discussing this panel, and I was thinking that one of the things that interested me out of the title were the subjects I study who tell us that they have had close, meaningful relationships with people they have never met in person, that they've only met them online. And Paul and I were talking about this, and he sort of sparked an idea in me. He said, how are those kids different from other kids? Which is a really obvious question. But the nature of being a ding-dong researcher is sometimes you don't notice what's right in front of your face. And so I was like, wow, yeah, those kids probably are really different. And so I got up early this morning and I started analyzing our data. We have about 2,500 kids we studied in 3 states during the pandemic, 2020 to 2022. So everything that we studied was happening during the pandemic for this particular data set. But That might kind of make it more interesting. What we found was that 14% of the subjects told us they had had a close relationship with somebody they had never met in person. And another 31% said they had a close relationship with somebody they'd only met maybe once or twice, people they did not interact with regularly. And just to sum it up very briefly, what I found, and we can talk more about this if you're interested in it, the main thing that really resonated with this group were psychiatric factors, not too surprisingly, right? So they were more likely to be anxious, they were more likely to be depressed, they were more likely to tell us they self-injured, they were a little more likely to be aggressive, and they were more likely to have seen a therapist. Vulnerable kids were also more likely to do that. So kids who were not heterosexual, who were not gender conforming, they were more likely to do it. Kids who said they had been bullied and were more vulnerable to bullying. So when we ask a subject if they've been bullied, we don't ask if they've been bullied successfully. We ask, were you vulnerable to it? Did it impact you? Because a lot of kids tell us they're very resilient. So these are kids who told us that they were very vulnerable to it. And a lot of these kids had academic issues. They were significantly more likely to be on special education. Having said all this, there were some things that these kids were not different in, and this surprised me. They were not different in social skills. Some of the kids had really poor social skills in that group, but some of them had really strong social skills. And that really surprised me. And by the way, we actually measure social skills. Like, we don't just take their word for it, but we actually measure it. They were a little more likely to believe that they had weaker social skills, but when they were tested, that's not really what we saw. Their sexual activity was not particularly relevant. Their use of social media wasn't particularly different. So they weren't more likely to say social media made them feel lonely. They weren't more likely to post about their relationships. They weren't more likely to have concerns about internet safety. They were a little more blasé about sexting. They didn't think it was going to impact their future opportunities, but a lot of kids think that. That's very common. They were a little more likely to say they knew people who had had problems with it. So, in other words, to sum it up, the social skills stuff and the social media use stuff wasn't terribly relevant, but the psychiatric stuff was. And the vulnerability of the kids in general was quite marked. So now what I think I'm going to do is I am going to turn it over to Henry. And Henry is going to introduce himself, and he's going to talk for a few minutes about his work, too.
Great. Testing, is this on? Oh, great. Good morning, everybody. My name is Henry Willis. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and an assistant professor in the psychology department at the University of Maryland, College Park. And broadly, my work focuses on how factors related to race and racism impact the mental health and well-being of Black youth and young adults. And also, we focus on how to translate and use technology to increase access to evidence-based treatments. And in particular, relevance to this panel, I look at how different forms of online racism impact the well-being of Black youth, but I also look at how protective factors, both online and offline protective factors, help Black youth remain resilient in these online contexts. And what brought me to this journey, I like to think of myself as being in one of the earliest cohorts of adolescents that adopted social media. So I can remember, when you needed an invite for Facebook or coding my MySpace page, or when you can actually text to send a tweet. So most people out there may not remember that. But since then, I've looked at how various forms of online racism, like I said, impact Black youth's mental health. So in terms of these different forms, I've explored how direct forms of racism online, so online racial discrimination, is experienced, but also those vicarious forms, so coming across racist content on your social media feed. And one of the more dangerous forms of this content that I've explored recently are exposure to race-related traumatic events, so shootings of unarmed Black men on social media. media, for example. And what we found in my work is that all of these different experiences lead to increases in anxiety, depression, PTSD symptoms, and even suicidal ideation. And we've used a range of nationally representative samples and longitudinal designs as well. We've also explored how online racism can be systemic and impact Black youth's health in many ways. So thinking about biases in healthcare algorithms and how that might lead to either misdiagnosis or under detection of certain mental health symptoms, or biases in law enforcement algorithms. And so looking at how that might place certain youth at an increased risk for experiencing police victimization. But it's also not all doom and gloom, and we know that Black youth also remain resilient. So one of the things that I explore are racial identity beliefs, and I found in my work that when youth feel proud about being Black, they actually are able to cope better with experiences of online racism. And those beliefs actually help them have better psychological well-being over time. And this is also important to highlight because these beliefs are both influenced by online interactions with peers and different types of content, but also offline interactions with parents and community members, et cetera. And we've also started to explore more novel forms of online protective factors. So one of the things we started to explore and conceptualize is what we call critical digital race literacy. So basically, how do Black youth, not only how are they aware of racism in online context, but how do they integrate approaches to anti-racism and challenging these different types of content online? And we found that Black youth are, they have high levels of critical race digital media literacy, but they also, these techniques are associated with better mental health outcomes over time. Also, more recently, I've explored how Black youth experience grief and loss in online contexts. And so through a lot of mixed methods work, especially a lot of community-based work, more recently in Harlem, New York, we were able to explore how social media, as we all probably know, is a double-edged sword, especially when it comes to grief and loss. So these youth talked a lot about how social media can be a place where they may not always feel comfortable talking about grief and loss because they may be seen as weak and not being able to handle their mental health. And they also talked a lot about how these interactions online actually could lead to offline challenges, such as increased community violence because of beef and conflict that occur in online spaces. But at the same token, they also highlighted how things such as TikTok videos have helped them become more aware of different mental health symptoms and help them learn strategies to cope with grief and loss. And also how social media can be used to actually kind of de-escalate conflict in online context before it kind of erupts into something more dangerous that might lead to the loss of a life offline. And finally, like I mentioned, I also study how technology can be used to improve the offline lives of Black youth. And so, as we know, since COVID-19, there's been an increase in digital interventions and telepsychology, but Black youth are often underrepresented in the development of these technologies. And, this really impacts whether or not they'll use these different interventions in the first place, but it also, it means that they aren't likely taking into account the unique experiences that Black youth have to navigate, such as exposure to online racism. And this is also a public health issue because we know with the rising suicide rates among Black youth and the limited in-person options for mental health services due to financial barriers or a lack of providers who can provide culturally relevant care, we need more options for getting mental health resources out to these communities. And so, long story short, I did a lot of mixed methods work really centering Black youth in a development phase of various apps for mental health. And I'm happy to talk more about that in a Q&A. But thank you, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Okay, if I stand, of course. Great, thank you. I have autism. Everyone on Instagram says so. These words were spoken to me by a patient of mine, Asher, not their real name, but a cheerful 16-year-old non-binary patient who told me in my office. And this was a little bit of a surprise because Asher was one of the most sort of gregarious, engaged kids who really was sort of a leader in discussions and very, very eloquent. But Asher was looking for a letter from me, her psychiatrist, that would allow them to leave class when they felt overwhelmed, right? So I was surprised, but I took it upon myself to interview the parents, the teachers, and the therapist, and as well as Asher themselves. And I found that in my estimation, they didn't meet criteria, not by a long shot. And I thought in my naivete that Asher would be so relieved when I informed them that in fact, I don't think that they had autism at all. I couldn't be more wrong. Asher said to me, do you know what autism is? So I started to go into criteria about rigid thought patterns and social and language deficits. Asher interrupted me. No, that's not what autism is. Autism is when you feel like you don't have, like your friendships are not what you want them to be, when you feel like everyone's looking at you, when you feel awkward in social situations, and this is what autism really is. And of course, what I wanted to say was that sounds to me like that's what adolescence is, right? But I did keep that to myself. So my name's Paul Weigle. I'm a practicing child and adolescent psychiatrist, and practicing for over 20 years now. I've been able to witness a lot of changes in how young people are presenting with mental health issues. And a lot of that, of course, has to do with their engagement in digital media, for better and worse. But one of the biggest changes we've seen, or I've seen in the last couple years, has been young people who come to me with their diagnosis, right? And they may or may not want be interested in my validation for that diagnosis, but they're not really questioning. They've decided. And I'm not alone. I surveyed over 100 child and adolescent psychiatrists at our meeting, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, in the past year, and 75% said that they see this very often or often. Okay, so in some ways, certainly social media has really engaged kids to communicate about mental health. And of course, in a lot of ways, this is a wonderful thing, right? Kids have an interest in their own mental health, and they're able to share their experiences and learn about issues related to mental health online. And really, I think that it's no coincidence that the stigma for treatment and for identifying as someone with mental illness has fallen precipitously, and young people who need a community that they can engage with often find it online, right? But of course, there is a downside. Studies will have confirmed that so much that young people are going to social media to learn about mental health, and that a majority of the information that they're learning online is incorrect, misleading, or just false. And of course, they tend to be looking at influencers, those who get a lot of likes, those who appear on their feed, and the influencers, their expertise and their authority is not necessarily screened out, right? So we've been seeing a lot of young people coming to us with self-diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder, multiple personality disorder, very common, with autism, a lot of ADHD and depression as well. And what I like to do with my patients when I first meet them with adolescents is ask them, hey, is it okay if we look at your Instagram feed together if they're an Instagram user. And I find it's really helpful to know what they're interested in and what they're engaged in. And very often, what I'm seeing is a lot of posts that relate to their experience of their mental health. In those who cut, I see, so their feed gives them, people who are sharing about their experience self-harming. Same with depression, same with eating disorders, and so on and so forth. Now, of course, we know that humans are a social species, and social learning tells us that a lot of the ways that we learn to adapt identities and behaviors is by observing others. And of course, more and more often, this is being done online. So, of course, the adoption, the idea of being ill, because a lot of the patients that I see, what they're reflecting online, what they're identifying online, is with being ill as a part of their identity, whether it's depression or eating disorder or autism. And I worry about that as their psychiatrist who really wants to promote a sort of agency, right? And for them to focus on their strengths. So, but of course, oftentimes that's not where they're at. And I think back to when I was a kid, and a lot of times when I didn't want to go to school, what did I do? I told my mom I was sick, right? And I think that the role of being sick and ill can be really very attractive for a lot of my patients. Why is that? Well, a lot of times they get feedback from other kids, and they can get very positive feedback. It gives their peers a chance to show that they care, right? When they express concerns about their own distress, mental illness, suicidality, so on and so forth. And it tends to get the attention and interests of other kids. And oftentimes kids will actually act as a pseudo-therapist or maybe like a parent to one another. So will you be there for me at 3 o'clock in the morning when I'm feeling the urge to cut? That kind of thing. And although, there are undoubtedly positives, I do worry that this sort of reinforces for the kids this sort of identity of being sick. And of course, and a lot of the kids in the group therapy programs I run talk about, if we're depressed, we really shouldn't have to go to school or do homework, right? And I want to, and kids know that other kids might have an IEP or something that defrays that. So that also is, concern. As a psychiatrist, if something makes them anxious, I really want them to have exposure to these situations. So there is some research data online that does provide some evidence for social contagion on lots of different things. You guys may be familiar with the TikTok ticks phenomenon that happened recently, and some kind of innovative studies that looked at that with self-harm, with depression, and even most controversial with gender dysphoria. But these studies have very weak evidence. And so what I'm hoping to see more out of research is more research into this phenomenon, because it's what we clinicians are seeing. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Linda Charmaraman, and I am the director of the Youth Media and Wellbeing Research Lab at Wellesley Centers for Women at Wellesley College. And I guess I'm most known for my NICHD grant following middle schoolers into high school of 1,500 students in the Northeast from pre-pandemic times through the current times of pandemic. And it's not quite post-pandemic yet, but and one of the things that we are really interested in our lab is how to understand the voices of the marginalized youth, that often the dominant narrative of technology research is focused, I know Jim Griffin said earlier, middle-class, white, convenience samples. And so what we did in our lab was to make sure that we vetted the school districts that we collected data from that were racially, ethnically diverse, socioeconomically diverse, sexual orientation-wise, IEPs, and so that's something that I wanted to kind of talk about today. And really, not only is it about looking at marginalized voices, but even within marginalized voices, there's even different levels of vulnerability within marginalized communities. So it's not just about, oh, this group is X and this group it tends to Y. There's subgroups and there's more nuance in those depictions. And I wanted to kind of tease apart some of my latest findings that I wanted to showcase that we're youth, yes, they do have rights that we've been talking about throughout this conference, but not all youth are, it's not a monolithic, youth. Adolescence comprises 10 to 20-something-year-olds, and they all have very different, developmental tasks that they're focusing on, and to be very, very clear about what population are we really talking about when you're making claims out there. Tips for parents. I get asked a lot by the media, by parents, give me a number, the number of hours maximum that we should be on, and what is the age that's best to start social media? I mean, everybody wants a clear-cut answer, but in the end, it's not a clear-cut answer for all youth and all families and all households and even all communities, all schools, all countries. I mean, they all have different norms, right, about how social media impacts their youth. And so I actually have an article in press right now with my colleague Maya Hernandez about racial ethnic identity and how it interacts with how you use social media and your well-being. And I was so interested to hear what Henry was saying earlier, how usually racial ethnic identity is protective for minority youth and their well-being. And in some cases, especially with proliferation of online hate messaging, Black Lives Matter and the anti-Asian sentiments that were happening during COVID, in our studies, we found that it was mixed. Some racial ethnic minorities felt protected in terms of if they have a strong racial ethnic identity. They had other people that they can also commiserate with, and they had people that were in their court. They had people in their communities to kind of go against some of the violence that they were seeing. But other communities, like for instance Asian American youth, were felt even more depressed when they saw, even the stronger their racial ethnic identity, the more they saw beatings and hateful messages about Chinese American bringing COVID to the U.S., the more depressed and hopeless they felt. And so it really is important to kind of see the nuances between, racial minority youth who might have different experiences. You might wonder how prevalent were some of these online hate messages. What we found was that majority of our sample, every race, all put together, about 12% of them could see hate messages through their algorithms and then their friends' postings. But for instance, Black and Asian youth saw significantly more online hate messaging, about 21% for them. And so just to think also, that kind of reminds me of the Pew Research results. Year after year, they always say that most young people are doing fine, like about 80% on social media. They feel more connected to their peers. They feel like they have a closer relationship. But there's about a quarter or a fifth of them that feel worse about themselves on social media. And so in a way, this is an area of not thinking of, okay, everybody is seeing hate messages and everybody needs to be protected. It's actually some of them, a fifth of them, at least in our research, need special attention. Everybody else is probably in the doing all right kind of category. Another story I wanted to tell is about our LGBT youth in our sample. We found out one of our big aha moments, it was just that year after year, there's more and more young people identifying or fluid in their social, in their LGBT identities than ever before. I've been collecting some of this data since 2017, and it's more like along the lines of 20 to 24% of your youth in your middle schools are identifying as LGBT youth or questioning. And the way that they're interacting with their peers online is a lot of them are finding that they're having less social isolation, finding online support. Sometimes online-only friends are even more supportive than their in-person interactions in their school environments or in their communities, in rural communities, and so, and also we're finding that within LGBT youth, there are a couple even more vulnerable youth within LGBT youth, and those are people who are are in flux, like the ones that are not quite sure what they are, they think they are. This year they feel this way, and another year they feel another way, and another year they feel another way. And those people that are in flux, since we have longitudinal data, we're trying to follow them over time and see at what intervention point would be a really important, time period to make sure that teachers and educators and parents, there's like a critical time period. Another very vulnerable group within LGBT youth are girls and non-binary youth are more likely to have nobody to talk to about how they're feeling about their sexual orientation. Boys are more likely to have at least 5 people, including parents, friends, and girls and non-binary youth are more likely to have 0, not even a friend to talk to. And so those are some things to think about as we're looking at this work. And I just wanted to also end with the idea that a lot of the work of our colleagues, our esteemed colleagues, have often a protectionist stance on what youth need to be doing and what they should be doing, what they should not be doing, and I invite more kind of a lens of empowerment for youth. That the youth are our future, and so we've been running digital well-being workshops for marginalized girls across the country that are free to anybody here, 11 to 15-year-old girls, and we the whole point of it is to make sure that they know that they have agency and they can learn from each other, and that near peer mentors like college students who are kind of more near their age rather than researchers that are really not their age may have ways to strategize about how to advise the next steps forward. Maybe they can advise adults about how it's best to protect their own privacy. Maybe they are the ones that could be training parents and educators. Maybe they're the ones that to be training the tech designers. And so we've invited them, and we're going to create a webpage to talk about all the different recommendations, so that in-person realities can also be reflected on some of their reflections on their online worlds. And so I look forward to talking with anybody about any of these initiatives.
Well, wow. My name is Rob Weil. I'm the Director of Research Policy Field Services for the American Federation of Teachers in what we call Ed Issues, which we all probably know as K-12. The impact of social media in our world is immense. It's very hard for our teachers to do their job when they're dealing with all the things that social media brings to the classroom. And I first start with what we're working on, and then I'll get a little more specific. Obviously, we're a teachers union. I work here in Washington, D.C. We're working with the federal government, the White House, state legislatures all across the country to try to figure out ways to put some guardrails and regulations on social media, common sense things that can be done. We're not trying to take social media away. We're trying to say, how can we make it work for people and deal with the youth mental health crisis that we're facing in our classrooms right now. You talk to any teacher, I talk to any teacher across the country, the number one thing comes up is what's going on in their classroom with discipline. Also, a lot of it's related to what they're doing on social media. It's a lot of that. I mean, in fact, TikTok and the gram and all those kind of things are literally running schools a lot of the time right now. We also do a lot of work with supporting groups. I'm going to talk about one of those efforts later in a minute. We also do a lot of internal work, doing surveys of teachers and parents of what's going on. And we did just within the last month, we did a large survey of parents and teachers about the impact of social media and the plus and minus. I'll just give one result from that to kind of show you what's going on today. 23% of parents and teachers say social media is bringing good things to education. 24% said it's doing harm in education, and everybody else says we don't know. That's where we're at in our classrooms. There's a lot of we don't know, and that's a problem because we got to move forward. We got to figure out a way to deal with these issues. Right now we have an ongoing ad hoc committee of teachers from all over the country that are dealing with creating guardrails and guidelines for teachers to use for social media, and also we're dealing with AI in the classroom right now. Because AI, it is the future, it's gonna be everywhere, it already is now. It's a lot more here than probably many people think. If you're talking about social media, you're talking about, social media is going to morph within the next year or two into a much more generative AI set of platforms. The programmed AI that many work on now, those will not be around within the next few months. It'll be a generative AI, and some of the things that we see in social media right now will, for lack of a better way, will be on steroids very quickly. And hopefully some of the good things will be true, but some of the bad things that happen in social media will also be pushed forward. And we're trying to deal with that and putting some rules in place. So before I go on, I want to talk about one of the partnerships that we did with Taking Action. Our job is to take research from all these great people and the people in the room and figure out how it helps the classroom. How does it help parents and communities improve what the mental health and the education for children? That's our job. So one of the things we did was we worked with Parents Together, Fair Play for Kids, Design It For Us, and the American Psychological Association to come up with a report on the use of social media in the classroom and what can be done, not just what's going on. There's a lot of people, I'm sure everybody in the room probably saw the Surgeon General's report on social media and kids and all those kind of things, and I'm not going to repeat all that stuff. But it's great to have a report, but what are we going to do? That's the next step. We have to take that. The American Federation of Teachers, we're about the next step. And so working with these groups, we came up with a report that you can pull up on your phones or whatever, called Likes versus Learning. And this report are 5 fundamental steps social media companies could do today that can improve what's going on in our schools. And I'll go through the 5 real quickly. I'm not going to go deeply into them, but I'm going to share them. Number 1, turn on the strongest safety features by default. Instead of starting with anybody can get anything, start the other way with the strongest safety features in place. And have independent review of those processes. Many of these social media companies, as we know, everything's done internally. Trust us. We've seen when internal people come out and say, well, you shouldn't really be trusting these companies. People who work for the companies come out and say, don't trust them. Number 2, make changes to defer students from overuse and addictive behavior. One of those is changing the algorithms to minimize what they call autoplay and infinite scroll. This is very important because it's the addictive behavior that these algorithms create. You guys know all about addictive behavior. These are purposeful in these algorithms. They sit down with your research and figure out how we can get more to kids because they make money on the ads that are related to those. So we have to stop those kind of algorithms, and one of the most important one is autoplay and infinite scroll. They could do that today. There's nothing stopping them from doing that except for profits, basically. Number 3, protect the privacy. As somebody who researches or looks at AI a lot and all that stuff, you kind of have to roll your eyes a lot of times when you talk about privacy and with AI and all those kind of stuff because it's built on personalized information. Your algorithm is built on the personalized information. Every stroke, everything you do is personalized information that they use to train their algorithms to give you certain things, to make you go to certain places. We want to make sure that we stop that. And one of those is, again, defaulting young users' accounts to the most private settings. Makes sense. It's not really hard. They could do that today. Stop excessive data tracking. I'm sure you probably have seen the stories about how much data is created. I was testifying on this very topic Tuesday in the Illinois Senate, and one of the senators asked the tech expert who was supporting not doing anything, saying the tech companies are doing a really good job, said that, is it correct that there are 52,000 data points on average in this social media that drive those algorithms? And I wasn't able to respond to that, but the answer is it's a lot more than that. Because it's every keystroke, every time, every swipe are all data that goes in. And stop delivery of personalized data-driven marketing to youth. The other thing is stop sending push notifications at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. Kids don't need to, you can stop that. It's very easy to do. And shield them from risky algorithms. Risky algorithms, there's something called content recommenders in these algorithms. We need to stop the harmful push of those algorithms. And give kids and parents the chance to turn them off in an easy way, not a 27 keystroke thing to turn it off. And you all know how that works, how difficult it is sometimes to stop the automatic parts of a system. And the fifth one is to directly engage with students, families, and the community. Talk to people. Figure out what's going on. Again, we heard if we just had a conversation, we might be able to get someplace. Unfortunately, we've kind of lost, I want to say it this way. We didn't do well on social media regulating it. We almost lost that game. We're trying to play catch up now. We can't play the same game with artificial intelligence. We need to be ahead of the curve. There's a lot of people talking about, we're worried about innovation, don't limit. We have to have more guardrails, and we need your research to help us understand how to create guardrails. And we also need your help to encourage the companies to do the right thing. And I'll stop there.
Okay, we still have about 25 minutes. Do people have questions or thoughts? Go right ahead.
Is this on? Allison Wood-Drain with the North Carolina Problem Gambling Program. Really what we're talking about, regardless of race, regardless of culture, is the slot machine being the creator of persuasive design and the intermittent reinforcement schedule that now is all over digital media. And some of the work that we're doing in North Carolina is focusing more on wellness, the protective factors, as opposed to the risk factors. And looking at models like the community resilience model, teaching kids wellness skills, and understanding regardless of who you are, we have similar biological responses, and how those are sometimes explicit or implicit memories, and how you can teach kids to understand sensations in their body and retrain their brain as a protective factor. We're also looking at really advocating for youth prevention education so they can become smarter than the industry, including digital media literacy with the Media Literacy Institute, and also connecting gaming, gambling, and digital media use together. And also being an advocate, Rob, for social emotional learning in schools, and really understanding how those three ties within schools and communities can create resilience in children. And I know we need to be trauma informed, but we also need to be resilience informed and realize that when you're looking at intersectionality, it's not just about the things that you feel are wrong, but it's the things that you feel are right, and focusing on that. And I'm encouraged to hear about some of the protective factors and the programs that you're doing and focusing on those. but that I'm wondering, how do we focus more on that and seeing the tie between cultures and understanding that trauma events affect us differently in terms of the way we respond to it, but we all respond the same way to different events. And how do we look at that and understand that teaching those wellness skills are really the cornerstone that need to be provided, not just in the education that we provide our kids, but also within our communities and our homes. So just interested in hearing that feedback.
Does anybody have any thoughts about resilience?
That does tie into a point that I failed to make, is that there's all these messages out there about wellness, and a lot of them are really counterproductive. There are kids are following influencers that encourage eating disorder behavior, self-harm, or other other maladaptive behaviors as in the name of mental health. And so one question is, how do we get positive messages out there? And it sounds like your work is a great start.
Yeah, I also just want to point out that a lot of these issues are issues where media gets out ahead of the research. So there are many messages that are being disseminated through media, and kids pick up on these issues. So for example, I think that a lot of the media content around mental health issues is one of the reasons. It's not just on social media, it's also on general media. And we've seen this for many years in bullying, where many people, parents and children, claim to be victims of bullying when they don't remotely meet any criteria for that. And it has more to do with the emotional reality, I think, than the label. But I think that is a problem with resiliency, because when the media gets out ahead of it, it really, it can really muddy the waters in studying it in research, and it muddies the waters in terms of really promoting kids and studying the kids who are really resilient and what we can find about that. I don't want to stop you, but there's a lot of people waiting, so if you don't mind, let's go ahead. And we'll go to you next.
My name is Andrea Davis. I am the founder of a website called Better Screen Time. I'm a huge advocate of helping and teaching parents to delay social media. I have 5 kids myself. I have a college age, 2 in high school, 1 in middle school, and 1 in elementary. I also taught 7th grade before I stayed home with my kids. So I've spent a lot of time with teenagers and with adolescents. And one of the topics that I'm concerned about is, there's been a lot of discussion about providing support on social media for specifically like minority youth and maybe those that feel vulnerable. But what does support look like on social media? And my concern is, where is the difference between support and influence? And I just challenge us to think about that. And I'm curious what the panel's thoughts are. And I'm grateful for your work. And I think that these youth that are minority need that support. But is social media the best place to go for that? And also, how much are they actually being influenced in their choice at such a vulnerable age? Because I taught middle school, I have kids that age, and I think it's a beautiful time in life where they're trying to figure out who they are. But are they getting confused by looking for those answers on social media? And I would love your thoughts.
Well, I would venture to say that some people, it's actually a very blurred line about the support you get on social media versus on offline realities. So for some people, it's their friends who are giving them that nudge and that comment and that you've got this, this is you're going to get through this. Sometimes that is the thing that is going to be a lifesaver for some people. And so I'd say also the idea of peer influence as having a stereotype that it's always negative, that's something I wanted to mention too, because sometimes peer influence could actually lead you to model positive behaviors as well. and I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on that.
Yeah. I was going to echo a lot of what you said, and I think support can look a lot of different ways, and I think it's important to think about those positive aspects that happen online, especially with peer influence. So thinking about like Black Lives Matter and how that was on social media, and it served as a role model to help teens and adolescents kind of navigate what they were witnessing on social media and on TV, especially during COVID lockdown, where they didn't have those kind of offline kind of experiences. And I think it really takes us really partnering with youth and these marginalized youth and creating spaces for them to have those positive experiences. And also we can still offer our own expertise and kind of strategies to help them with their well-being, but it's most important for them to have those spaces where they can feel safe and explore these things.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kenya Farkason. I am a PhD student at Howard University. So I have a specific question for Dr. Willis. I previously worked with adolescents in Philadelphia, and I was seeing a lot of what you were talking about before with grief, with conflict through social media. So I'm curious, what has been in the research the determining factor between that de-escalation of conflict versus the escalation of conflict?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of factors that contribute to that, and actually a lot of the work that I've been doing with Desmond Patton, who couldn't be here because of COVID, has been working with youth in Philly, actually, and around grief and violence. But I think one of the biggest things is being, how are they being policed in these different online and offline realities? So a lot of what we've also seen is these youth would make these posts and it's flagged either by some algorithm or some kind of other moderation thing, and it actually maybe leads to more escalation versus de-escalation in the sense that, it might prevent them from getting the kind of resources they need to de-escalate. So a part of it is kind of, observing these interactions online in that way. And the other is really providing that offline support as well. And so instead of policing youth when they are kind of maybe inching towards violence online, how can we kind of jump in and offline and kind of provide those resources, whether it's conflict mediation skills, et cetera.
Thank you.
I can say, too, that one of the things we've seen in our research is that it's really all about the context. So it's really about where the youth is at that point in time, what's going on in their lives, what they're seeing offline as well as what they're seeing online, because as every practitioner knows, you can see the exact same circumstances in different children with quite different outcomes. And I think that's been one of our grand mistakes in looking at technology in children, is not really understanding how critical context is in rather than vilifying one area of tech or admiring the other and letting it, roam unleashed, sort of understanding that we're going to have to figure out what children are really vulnerable and what children are going to do better with resiliency. Sorry, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Laurel Cook, and I am an associate professor of marketing. And before you become too skeptical, I spend 100% of my time doing research not on profit at all, but on serving vulnerable communities. And believe it or not, it's been an 8-year battle to get inside of a college of business a lab focused on digital, on tech and digital media. And I really would love some insight or suggestions on Linda, you mentioned your workshops that you offer free to the community. Ideas about that, or on creating a youth advisory board. I live in a state in West Virginia, and it's very poor, both in terms of fiscal resources and literacy resources. So I think anything I could do to maybe kind of model what you've done successfully would be much appreciated.
Oh, absolutely. There's probably a lot of people here that run their own youth advisory boards. I know Cindy talked about it earlier today. They are, as I said before, the future of our tech, right? And the way that we have recruited youth advisory board members is the people that have participated in our workshops and who know intimately what the mission was about and how they can create a better experience for future youth and have it iteratively improve each year. Those are our prime candidates for being a part of the board, and so that they can actually co-design interventions for themselves in the future. And so that's been successful in our lab. I know other advisory boards might do like a national call, kind of off the street kind of a call, word of mouth type of thing. Yeah, so, but I wish you best of luck in trying to get off the ground with some of that research. And I know marketing, have you ever been to ICA, International Communication Association? That's
No.
a great other area in which they have a children and adolescent stream. And so you can meet with more people like in your area that could maybe collaborate on studies together.
There are not enough of us doing this kind of work.
Right.
It's hard.
Just so you know, too, we actually sometimes help other states set up what we have as a center where we train university students for credit, and they go out into the community and work with kids. And so that's a model that costs nothing for anybody, and the schools get it completely free of charge. So if you're interested in working with a dog, I can help you look into that.
Thank
That
you.
interests you. Next question?
Yes. Thank you all for sharing first. And I'm Amy New. I'm an assistant professor from Colorado Mesa University. I study the use of digital technologies among adolescents and young adults. And one topic I'm studying is the use of beauty filters and its impact on college women, which make this session really attractive to me as I consider the beauty filter as a cyber mirror. So my question for the panel is also about this word mirror. So we're seeing there are lots of things that are shared in common in the online world and the real world. We have those online aggression, we have offline aggression, we have online discrimination, and we have offline discrimination. But the thing is, I feel like lots of, from my own research, I feel it's not always just mirroring what's happening in the offline world. There are so many unique affordances of the virtual world that makes it vastly different from the adolescents' offline experiences. So there are adolescents who are not satisfied with their body image, and they create the most attractive avatar online. They are those kids who are not able to do sports, who are not good at sports, but they can be the best athletes, like a soccer player in the online world, right? And so my question is, both the online world and the offline world contribute to who those people are and how they grow, but there are vast differences between those two worlds. My question for the panel is, how do individuals, kids and adolescents, how they reconcile those differences between those two worlds, and how should they reconcile those differences? So what are some of your insights on this from your research or work that can speak to this question? Thank you.
Well, I hope this answers the question. One of the things is the difference between the online world and the real world is in the online world, there's a company pushing stuff to you. That doesn't happen in the real world as much. Yeah, you see TV and you see ads, but it's not so addictive like it is. There is a big difference between the online world and the real world. And I wanted to be clear about my comments, although I talked a lot about what the social media can do. It's all about support and all the things that we want to train our teachers and we want to give parents support. But that would be a much easier task if these things were in place. Because right now, think of all the things support and teaching kids has to overcome to deal with. So it's not this or that. It's all of us working together. That's the key. The key is, yes, social media companies, please do these common sense things to make it easier for us to help kids and support them. If we have to come together, that's the key to getting, I'm not going to say getting it right, but that's the key to moving forward. That's what we have to do. We have to do guardrails, but we also have to do the support. But support becomes easier if you don't have to overcome all this other stuff. And that's the point I hope you take away from my comments here. It's not one or the other.
Yeah, so your comment made me think about how social media is a mirror, right? But it's a distorted one. And my understanding of literature and talking with kids is that kids, they do know that. They are aware of that. And yet, just like they're aware that going onto social media to get information about mental health is suspect. But they do it anyway because it's convenient and entertaining, and it cues into what their peers are thinking. And sorry, lost my train of thought there. And similarly, kids know that when they're looking at images online, when they're looking at curated social media posts and profiles, that they're not looking at reality. And yet, my understanding is that research shows that it doesn't matter, that unconsciously they take in these ideas of what is normative for beauty or for social life or that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's exactly what we find in our research, is that kids are very conscious of these distortions, but at the same time they acknowledge that they still influence them emotionally. So there's sort of two levels to this. I want to give time for our last question. Please, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you for your work and for being here with us today. My name's Alex Capuco. I am a Georgetown psychiatry resident, and I had a question. Actually, Dr. Weigel, I really liked how you were talking about how you will kind of sit side by side with some of your patients and go over their social media feed. I thought that was a really nice idea. I guess I'm wondering for you or for anyone else on the panel, if you have thoughts on, like from a clinician side, advice for risk factors, protective factors, or screening tools, anything that you think is a good idea for us to be able to identify and treat patients, either children or adults, who have potentially problematic social media use?
Thanks. That's a great question, and I'm aware that in our it's great to see another psychiatrist here. So so glad you're here. That it's a big deficit in psychiatric training is that really issues related to screen media and mental health, which are huge, are just not part of a curriculum for the vast majority of residency programs today, for example. And at the ACAP, we are working on trying to change that. But your question speaks to identifying those things. And unfortunately, as a psychiatrist, I usually find out about the problem after, like, way late. Like, it's very often like when a kid has posted online that they're going to kill themselves, and then some other kid sees it and is concerned. And so we're not really good. In psychiatry, we tend to be kind of reactive, right? We're not very good at preventing issues. We're there to put the Band-Aid on afterwards. But I do think that some of these efforts at resiliency and getting positive messages out can make a difference. But I'd be interested to talk with you more.
All right, so now we have 4 minutes left. 4 minutes. So I'm going to shut up and ask each of you in 1 minute, if you have any final thoughts. Please keep your thoughts to 1 minute or the gong goes off. Henry?
All right. So I guess any final thoughts that I would like to share is really centering the voices of marginalized youth as we continue to research social media and develop these different technologies that not only help them navigate what they experience online, but also their well-being offline. And this could look like creating advisory boards with youth. You're going to have to pay them for their time, and they're going to ask how much to pay. But it could be really influential and really treating them like experts. Like, I think, many of us have said it today, like they already know kind of what's going on, and it really takes that kind of equal partnership that'll help us get to the next level. Hopefully that was a minute.
Good work.
All right.
Paul, you're up.
So I just wanted to remind everyone that on Saturday, we're going to have breakout groups where we're going to have more interactive discussion about this. And if you haven't signed up for your breakout groups, but you're going to be here on Saturday, you can do so at registration. And if some of the issues that I spoke about interest you, there is a breakout group about self-diagnosis and online psychoeducation. So hope to see you there.
I wanted to just remind us all that adolescence is about identity development, and sometimes that occurs online and it definitely occurs offline, and to think of it as a playground for trying on different aspects of yourself. And some of that could be scary for their adults in their lives, but to give them that room for growth is really important. And I also wanted to say that there's nothing inherently good or bad about social media. It's all about the context and about the quality of the content that they're consuming and their motivations for being on social media. And lastly, it's time that we tell them ideas about what to do rather than what not to do. We're always saying, no, don't do this, beware of that, and really, what can we do on social media that everybody can agree on?
Good job. Skin of your teeth.
So I'll finish with thank you for inviting the American Federation of Teachers here, because this is how it has to happen, is different groups come together and start talking and working together on these issues instead of being isolated in their issues. So I'll just stop with what I said earlier. It's about everybody working together, and I appreciate that the AFT was invited to speak here today.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you to the panel.